The palace of Nerith stood like a dream under the twin suns of the Trion system. Its walls were made of shining crystal that caught the light of two skies and scattered it across the city below. The people of the capital looked up at the palace every morning with pride and faith. They called it the Palace of Glass and Stars because at night its towers glowed like constellations, and by day they reflected the light of the suns. Inside the palace lived Queen Sarah, ruler of 20 worlds and protector of the Trion race. She was wise and calm, known for her golden eyes that could make even the proudest warrior lower his head. She had ruled for 50 years, and under her leadership the Trion had found peace with their old enemies. The greatest of those treaties was with the human coalition, a young species that had risen from a small blue planet far from the core worlds. Many older races had laughed when humans first joined the Galactic Council, but the Queen had not laughed. She had seen something strong and bright in them. As a sign of friendship, one human soldier was chosen to serve as part of the palace guard. His name was Marin. He was tall but not large, his hair dark, his eyes steady. To most aliens, he looked simple, almost fragile compared to the tall armored Trion warriors who stood around him. Yet there was something about the way he moved and watched his surroundings. He was quiet and patient, and he never left his post without permission. Other guards often teased him in small ways. They called him slow or primitive when he failed to understand a complex alien command at first. Marin never replied in anger. He learned from his mistakes and kept his attention fixed on his duty. He had been trained on the human homeworld where soldiers were taught to fight with heart as well as skill. That training had stayed with him even among the shining walls of an alien palace. The Queen had noticed him more than once. When she walked through the throne corridor, she saw the human standing as still as stone. When other guards turned their heads to follow her or bowed with nervous pride, Marin did neither. He only stood with his weapon ready and his eyes forward. The Queen found that strange but comforting. A being who served without need for attention was rare in her palace. Every morning began the same way. The suns rose, the palace shields glimmered in the air, and the royal AI, called Luminara, filled the halls with soft music. The corridors were full of envoys, merchants, and servants. Drones floated through the air carrying trays of shining data crystals. Guards stood in rows along the marble halls. Marin's post was near the Queen's Gate, a tall arch that led to the throne room itself. His job was simple: stand, observe, and protect. One day began no different than any other. The sky was bright, the suns warm. Marin took his position as the royal banners waved in the air. A convoy of diplomats from the center cluster arrived to meet the Queen, and the palace filled with noise. Alien voices echoed, their strange accents mixing in the air. Marin stood among the taller guards, his eyes scanning every face. During the meeting, Marin noticed something small yet odd. A group of maintenance drones floated near the power lines that ran along the ceiling. They had been repaired the day before, yet they moved again as if performing another check. No one else seemed to care, but Marin's instinct told him to remember it. His training on Earth had taught him that small details often mattered most. When night came, the palace lights shifted from gold to blue. The corridors emptied as diplomats returned to their ships. The Queen retired to her private chambers where she often studied the star maps of her empire. Marin's shift continued. He walked the long silver hallways, his boots echoing softly. The twin moons rose above the crystal towers, covering everything in pale light. He felt a calm peace as he stood under the grand archway. It was a rare kind of silence, one that felt alive rather than empty. Then something changed. The faint hum of the palace shields vanished. It was so sudden that Marin thought his hearing had failed. He tapped his communicator, but it was silent. The usual glow of the corridor lights flickered, and one by one they went dark until only the emergency strips along the floor remained. Marin's first thought was power failure, but that was impossible. The palace drew energy from the twin suns through a massive orbital grid. Even a system error could not shut it all down at once. He turned toward the other guards, but the corridor was empty. Their posts were vacant. The sound of the AI's music had faded. He took a step forward and heard his own breath louder than before. The silence was too deep, too complete. Something had cut through the palace's systems with precision. Marin's human heart began to beat faster, but he controlled his breathing. He switched his weapon from standby to active mode. The blue light on its side glowed faintly. From the far end of the hall, he saw a shadow move. It was not one of the guards. The motion was wrong, too smooth, too deliberate. He lifted his weapon and called out, "Identify yourself." No answer came. The shape vanished. Marin's training told him not to chase without knowing the threat. He turned toward the Queen's Gate instead. If the palace was under attack, her safety came first. He moved through the corridor in silence, each step measured and steady. The great doors that led to the throne chamber were closed. Usually they glowed with lines of energy, but now they were dull and cold. He tried the control panel beside the gate. The screen flashed once, then died. He hit the emergency code, but it gave no response. Then faintly he heard something through the door. It was a soft voice, calm and steady. "Is anyone still on post?" the voice asked. It was the Queen. Marin took a breath and stepped closer to the door. "Yes, Your Majesty. The palace is dark, but I'm still here." There was a pause, then her voice came again, softer but clear. "All systems have gone silent. I cannot contact the guards or the command center. I believe we are under attack. Remain where you are." Marin's grip tightened on his weapon. "Understood." He took position before the door and scanned the hallway again. A faint pulse of red light moved along the wall like the trace of a scanning beam. Whoever had entered the palace was using cloaking technology. He could not see them, but he could sense movement. Far above, through the palace windows, the stars looked sharp and bright against the dark sky. The twin moons hung low, shining like silver shields. Marin stood alone before the Queen's Gate, one human among countless alien machines and empty halls. He remembered his training words from the academy. "When systems fail, trust your senses. When allies fall, stand your ground." Those words echoed in his mind as he adjusted his stance. Minutes passed. Though they felt longer, the hum of distant engines vibrated through the floor. He guessed that enemy ships had entered orbit. The palace was silent because the enemy had struck at its heart. Then, far down the hall, a loud crash broke the quiet. A door burst open. Marin turned and saw flashes of faint blue light. Figures stepped through the smoke, shapes barely visible under their cloaks. The intruders had arrived. Marin took aim and waited. The Queen was behind him, trusting him without question. Every other guard might have fallen or fled, but he would not. In that moment, under the fading glow of the palace lights, one human soldier stood alone between a silent throne and the darkness beyond. He whispered to himself, not as a prayer, but as a promise. "As long as I stand, the Queen will not fall." And the silence of the palace deepened, waiting for the storm that was about to begin. The palace of Nerith was no longer bright. Its crystal walls that once shone with golden light now stood cold and dark. The hum of machines, the sound of drones, and the gentle voice of the royal AI had all vanished. It was as if the great palace had gone to sleep. Marin stood before the Queen's Gate, his weapon ready. His heart beat in his chest, slow but strong. He had fought in many battles before, but never in a place so silent. His helmet scanner showed no signals, no movement, yet his instincts told him the enemy was near. The Queen's voice came again through the door, calm but faint. "Guard Marin, do you see anything?" He answered, "No, Your Majesty. But something is here. The palace systems are down. The others are gone. Then you must stay at your post," the Queen said. "The intruders seek me. You cannot let them reach this chamber." Marin nodded, though she could not see him. "Understood, Your Majesty." He checked his weapon again and adjusted the power level. The blue light on its side pulsed softly. He switched off his helmet light to let his eyes adjust to the dim corridor. Humans had weaker eyes than Trion guards, but years of training had taught Marin how to see through darkness. Shadows could hide enemies, but they could also protect him. From the far side of the hall came a faint metallic sound, like claws brushing against the floor. Marin turned quickly, rifle raised. A shape flickered in and out of sight. It was tall, moving with silent speed. Then came another and another. The intruders were not many, but they moved like ghosts. Marin's mind went to the stories told in the barracks about the Dravik. They were an old enemy of the Trion, believed to have vanished after the last war. Their ships had been built from black metal that absorbed light, and their soldiers could move unseen by most sensors. If they had returned, then the peace of 20 worlds was in danger. The Dravik had chosen the palace as their first target, and their goal was clear. They wanted the Queen alive. Killing her would turn her into a symbol, but capturing her would destroy the unity she had built. The first attack came without warning. A sharp beam of blue light cut across the corridor, striking the wall beside Marin. He rolled aside, taking cover behind a column. The crystal shattered where the beam hit, glowing red for a moment before turning to dust. Marin returned fire. His rifle barked once, sending a burst of kinetic rounds that struck the floor near the attackers. The cloaking fields around them shimmered, revealing rough outlines of tall figures. Marin moved fast. He aimed not at where they were, but where they would move next. His bullets hit one figure in the chest. The shimmer broke, revealing a dark armored shape that fell to the ground. The rest of the attackers pulled back for a moment. He used that time to press a small beacon against the floor. The device was old, built by human engineers for signal boosting. It was simple but strong. Maybe it could cut through the palace interference. He activated it, hoping it might send a signal to anyone still alive. Static filled his earpiece, then a voice came through, broken but real. "This is Guard Lauren. We are trapped near the east wing." "What is happening?" Marin kept his eyes on the corridor.
"The palace is under attack."
"Unknown number of enemies. They have cloaking devices. Stay away from the central hall. Protect the civilians if any are with you." Before Lauren could answer, the signal faded again. The beacon flickered and went dark. Whatever had cut off power before was still active. Marin knew help would not come soon. He crouched low, listening. The air was heavy, the silence deep. Then he heard the sound again, closer this time. The enemy was moving through the vents and shadows, searching for paths toward the throne chamber. He had to delay them as long as possible. Marin moved carefully along the wall, counting each step. His boots made no noise on the smooth floor. When he reached the first corner, he placed a motion mine on the ground. It was a small round device from his field kit. The palace guards used them for training drills, but tonight it would serve in battle. He moved to the next corner and set another. He planned to turn the whole corridor into a trap. Every delay would buy the queen more time. Behind the sealed doors, Queen Asera stood beside her throne. She had activated the last of the manual defenses, but without power they were useless. The palace AI had gone silent, and no one answered her commands. She could only trust the one voice that still answered. She remembered the human who stood so quietly at her gate. The other guards had often spoken of him with amusement. They said he was too serious, too plain, but now all of them were gone and only he remained. She felt something stir in her heart, a mix of fear and hope. Marin's traps worked sooner than he expected. A low hum filled the hall as one of the mines detected motion. There was a bright flash followed by a deep thud. A cloaked figure was thrown backward by the blast, its armor cracked. Marin fired again, finishing the job before moving to a new position. The air smelled of burning metal. Another enemy appeared from the shadows, this one moving fast. Marin ducked under a shot and rolled to his side. His rifle clicked empty. He switched to a blade attached to his belt. It was a simple human weapon. Forged steel with no energy cell, yet it was sharp and reliable. The attacker swung with a glowing spear, but Marin blocked and countered. Sparks flew as the two weapons struck again and again. The Dravik was stronger and taller, but Marin was faster. He moved with precision, striking where the armor joints were weak. The fight ended when he drove the blade into the enemy's chest. The Dravik fell without a sound. Marin stood breathing hard, his armor scratched but still holding. He dragged the fallen body aside and checked its gear. The weapon was advanced, too advanced for a small group. This meant the attack was not a raid but part of a larger plan. The Dravik must have infiltrated the Trion systems for months before making their move. He activated the weapon and studied the symbols. The language was old, but he recognized a sign used in their war banners. It meant revenge. Marin realized then that this attack was not just political. It was personal. The Dravik sought to destroy the queen who had ended their empire's pride. The thought made him tighten his grip on the blade. He had seen revenge destroy many soldiers before. It blinded them and turned them into monsters. He could not allow that to happen here. Hours seemed to pass, though it was still the same endless night. The palace halls were filled with smoke and broken glass. Fires burned in distant chambers, lighting the walls in red and gold. Marin moved between the shadows, setting more traps, sealing doors, and blocking corridors. Each time he thought he had a moment to rest, he heard another sound or saw another flicker of movement. The Dravik kept coming, testing his defenses. They were patient and clever. They wanted to wear him down until he made a mistake. But Marin did not make mistakes. He had learned from every battle that fear could be turned into focus. He remembered his training instructors on Earth saying, "Hold the line even when the line is only you." He reached the final barrier before the Queen's chamber. It was the last working shield door in the palace. He rerouted what little power remained from the nearby panels to strengthen it. Blue light spread across the frame. It was not much, but it would hold for a while. Through the sealed doors, the Queen spoke again. "Guard Marin, are you still there?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "The enemy is inside the palace. I have blocked all paths to you. You must stay in the chamber." There was a pause. Then she said, "I am proud of your courage. You stand alone, yet you have not fallen." Her words filled him with new strength. "As long as I breathe, no harm will come to you." In that moment, both knew the truth. The palace defenses were gone, the guards scattered, and help was far away. Yet one human stood between the Queen and the darkness. Outside, the twin moons sank lower. The stars above the palace shone bright through the broken ceilings. The night of shadows was not yet over, but Marin stood ready for whatever came next. He was not fighting for glory or for his species. He was fighting because someone had to stand when others could not. The silence returned for a while, deep and heavy. Marin leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, weapon in hand. He looked at the closed doors of the throne chamber and whispered softly to himself, "You are not alone, Your Majesty." Then he straightened his back and prepared for the next attack, knowing the night still had many battles left to fight. Smoke hung in the air of the once beautiful palace. The crystal walls that once reflected sunlight now showed cracks and burns. The silence between the distant sounds of battle was heavy and full of tension. The night of shadows had turned into a fight for survival. Marin stood near the Queen's gate with his weapon in hand. The blue light on the door flickered weakly, showing that the shield was losing power. He had spent hours fighting off small groups of Dravic soldiers. His armor was damaged, his shoulder plate cracked, and one side of his visor was dark from a burn mark. Yet his eyes stayed sharp and focused. He moved through the corridor, checking each trap he had set. Most had already exploded or been destroyed in earlier fights. Only 2 motion mines were left. He took one and placed it behind a fallen pillar. The other he set near the corner that led to the main hall. He knew the Dravic would attack again, and he wanted to make every second count. The palace lights were still dim. Only the red emergency glow painted the walls. Marin used the little power left in his armor to light the area around him. His body ached from exhaustion, but he refused to stop. The Queen was still behind those doors, and that was all that mattered. From the sealed throne chamber, Queen Asera watched the small display on her wrist console. It showed faint signals of movement outside. She could hear the distant noise of explosions and weapons. Her guards had fallen silent long ago. Only one name still appeared on the screen, flashing weakly. Guard Marin. She remembered the first time she had seen him. It had been during a ceremony when the human coalition joined the Trion Alliance. He had stood in the crowd, a young soldier with calm eyes. While others had looked nervous or proud, he had looked steady. She had chosen him as a symbol of trust between species. Now that choice had become the only thing keeping her alive. Marin checked the hallway again. He heard a faint sound from above. The ceiling panel shifted slightly. He aimed his rifle and fired a single round. A small dark object fell through the air, landing with a metallic clang. It was a probe shaped like a spider. It crawled fast toward the wall. Marin stepped forward and crushed it under his boot. The probe was used for scanning. It meant the Dravic were close again. He reloaded his weapon and took position near the door. His breathing was slow and steady. He had learned long ago that fear could not be allowed to take control. Fear made the hands shake and the aim fail. Calm thinking saved lives. A sudden wave of light burst from the far end of the hall. The energy door of the outer corridor exploded. 3 figures stepped through the smoke. Their cloaks shimmered as they adjusted to the light. Marin recognized the pattern of their armor. These were elite Dravic warriors, taller and stronger than the others. Each carried a weapon that glowed red with plasma energy. They moved forward, carefully scanning for traps. One of them spoke in a low mechanical voice. The sound was rough, like metal grinding on stone. Marin could not understand the words, but he knew the meaning. They were calling him out. He waited until they reached the center of the hall, then pressed a button on his wrist. The motion mine under the pillar exploded. The blast threw one of the attackers backward. The other 2 raised their shields quickly and advanced again. Marin fired 3 shots. One hit the wall, the other struck a shield. and the third found a gap between the armor plates of a Dravik's leg. The creature fell with a roar of pain. The last one kept coming. Its weapon glowed brighter as it fired a beam of red energy. Marin jumped aside, rolled across the floor, and fired back. The bullet hit the energy cell on the Dravik's weapon. The weapon exploded in the attacker's hand, throwing sparks and smoke into the air. The Dravik fell but kept moving, crawling toward Marin with sharp claws. Marin stepped forward and kicked the weapon away. He aimed his rifle but found it empty again. Without hesitation, he drew his steel blade and drove it into the Dravik's chest. The attacker went still. He stood breathing hard, looking at the floor covered in debris. His body felt heavy, but his spirit stayed strong. He walked to the side wall where a small control panel flickered weakly. The old Trian energy lines were still running deep under the palace. He used his limited engineering knowledge to reroute power from the broken sections toward the main gate. Sparks jumped as he worked. His fingers burned slightly from the heat, but the shield door glowed brighter. The Queen's voice came through the intercom. "Guard Marin, report." "The hall is secure for now," he answered. "The enemy keeps testing our defenses. I will hold the line." There was silence for a moment, then she said softly, "You have done more than anyone could have asked. Rest if you can. I cannot rest while they are near, Your Majesty." She wanted to argue, but his tone stopped her. She knew that kind of determination. It was the same kind that had built her empire long ago. She turned off the intercom and walked to the window. Outside, the twin moons had set, leaving only the faint light of distant stars. She whispered a quiet prayer to the stars that the human would survive the night. Marin leaned against the wall for a brief moment. He looked at the broken armor of the fallen Dravik and shook his head. They were powerful and well-trained, yet they had fallen. It was not because he was stronger, but because he refused to give up. That was the difference between survival and defeat. He checked his ammo pack and found only a few rounds left. He picked up a fallen energy spear from one of the Dravik soldiers and tested it. The weapon responded to touch, glowing faintly blue. It was still usable. He practiced a few swings, feeling its weight. It was heavier than human weapons, but strong enough to break through armor. He heard a deep rumble under the floor. The palace trembled slightly. The sound grew louder. He ran to the window and looked out through the cracks. Several dark ships had landed near the palace gardens. Their lights glowed red against the dark sky. The Dravik reinforcements had arrived. Marin knew he could not stop an army, but he could delay them. He ran back to the throne gate and began to weld the side doors shut, using the heat from the energy spear. The metal melted and sealed the openings. He set the remaining motion mine near the last corridor entrance. Each small barrier could slow the enemy for a few minutes. Every minute counted. Inside the throne room, Queen Asera stood before the old royal armor displayed on a wall. It had belonged to her ancestors, worn during the early wars of the Trian. She touched the chest plate and remembered stories of courage told to her as a child. Slowly, she lifted the armor from its stand and began to put it on. She was not a fighter anymore, but she refused to be taken without resistance. Outside, Marin heard another explosion. The enemy had broken through the outer gates. He stood firm before the throne doors, holding the energy spear in both hands. The corridor filled with smoke again. Through the haze, he saw many shapes moving toward him. The Dravik shouted in their harsh language. Energy bolts hit the walls, sending fragments flying. Marin dodged and swung his spear, striking one enemy across the chest. The weapon's energy burned through the armor. Another attacker tried to flank him, but Marin kicked the weapon aside and struck back. The battle became close and brutal. His arms felt heavy, but his movements stayed precise. He used every piece of cover, every trick he had learned. He fought not as a machine, but as a human who refused to surrender. When the smoke cleared, the corridor was full of fallen enemies. Marin stood in the middle, armor dented and covered in dust. The spear hummed quietly in his hand. His legs trembled from exhaustion, but he still stood. From inside the throne room, the Queen called again, her voice strong and clear. "Guard Marin, are you still standing?" He smiled faintly, even though no one could see him. "Yes, Your Majesty." "They have not passed me." Her voice carried pride and warmth. "Then you are the barrier that protects the crown." Those words gave him strength again. He turned back toward the dark corridor and waited. He knew more enemies would come. He was only one man, but he was enough for now. He looked at the broken lights above and whispered softly to himself, "As long as I stand, they will not reach her." The sound of engines outside grew louder. The next wave was coming. The human adjusted his stance, tightened his grip on the weapon, and faced the darkness again. The night was far from over, but his will was unbroken. He was the last guard of the Queen, the last light in the palace of glass and stars. And as the shadows moved closer once more, Marin prepared to fight until his last breath, because that was what humans did when everything else had fallen. The palace of Nerith was in chaos. Crystal walls were cracked, corridors were strewn with debris, and smoke filled every hallway. The hum of the once powerful defense systems had disappeared. Outside, the enemy ships glowed red against the dark sky. The Dravik had taken the outer gardens and were moving closer to the heart of the palace. Yet within the throne chamber, Queen Asera remained calm. She had donned the ceremonial armor of her ancestors, its polished metal reflecting the red glow of the fires beyond. The armor was heavy, almost awkward, but she felt strength in wearing it. It was not just protection. It was a reminder of the courage of those who had ruled before her. She walked to the large viewing window that looked over the central corridor. The corridors where the human guard, Marin, had fought were filled with shadows of enemy soldiers. She had watched him move like a single force, dodging, attacking, and blocking paths with traps he had prepared. Every strike he made, every action he took was precise and deliberate. He was more than a soldier. He was the barrier between her and the enemy. Queen Asera had trusted many guards in her lifetime, but none had shown the courage of this human. Others had fled when the corridors grew dark or when alarms failed. Marin had stood alone, facing an enemy far stronger and faster than any human should have been able to handle. She knew that the palace would fall if she left her post. If the Queen fell, the Trian worlds would crumble into chaos. Every minute mattered, and every action could change the outcome. She could not sit idly by. "Guard Marin," she said, speaking through her console. "I cannot remain behind and do nothing. I will join you. Tell me what to do." The human's voice answered through the intercom, steady and calm. "Your Majesty, the corridor is dangerous. The enemy is stronger in numbers. It is not your duty to fight. Stay inside and conserve your strength." "I cannot hide while you risk everything alone," she said. "I have trained for this moment my entire life. I may not be as fast or as strong, but I can hold my own. Teach me and we will face them together." Marin paused for a moment. Then he spoke firmly. "Very well, Your Majesty. I will show you what to do. Follow my movements. Keep your stance strong and never hesitate." He guided her step by step. The Queen adjusted her balance, raising her shield and weapon according to his instructions. Her first swing was slow and cautious, but she gained confidence with each movement. She was not as quick as a human, nor as agile as the Dravik, but she had the heart to keep going. Outside the chamber, Marin had set the last few traps along the main corridor. Smoke and sparks filled the air as enemy forces tested the barriers again. He moved silently, stepping over debris, checking each corner. His weapon, though old and simple, was reliable. His steel blade hummed with energy, ready to strike when needed. The first wave of Dravik approached the Queen's Gate again. Marin had calculated their movement patterns. He waited until they were within the trap zone. Then he activated the mines. The explosion threw one enemy backward, and the other two stumbled over scattered debris. Marin struck quickly, disabling both attackers. The Queen watched through her viewing screen, learning every detail. She observed how Marin moved, how he timed his attacks, and how he used the environment to his advantage. She realized that strength was not enough. Survival required planning, patience, and courage. Minutes passed like hours. Marin and the Queen coordinated through the intercom. "Move to the left corridor," he instructed. "The door there is still holding. Use it as your cover." The Queen followed, keeping her armor steady. Her hands were steady on her weapon. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of scorched metal. Every breath reminded her that this was real, that failure could cost lives across the Trion worlds. From the other end of the corridor, the Dravik regrouped. Their ships sent signals to the remaining forces, coordinating their next strike. They were patient, calculating, but Marin had learned to predict their moves. Every time they attacked, he countered with precision. Every time they thought to bypass him, he had already sealed the path. The Queen learned quickly. When Marin instructed her to swing her weapon, she blocked the enemy attack successfully. When he showed her where to aim, she struck the enemy's weak point. Her movements were not perfect, but they were effective. She felt strength growing inside her with every passing moment. Marin moved toward the last corridor, placing barricades as he went. The enemies were following, but they had to deal with his traps first. One Dravik fell into a pit he had hidden. Another triggered a tripwire that set off a loud alarm. The sounds echoed through the hall, confusing the attackers and giving Marin and the Queen a small advantage. Through it all, he kept his focus on protecting the Queen. Every time she made a move, he corrected her, guided her, and encouraged her. The Queen realized that his lessons were more than about fighting. They were about survival, about never losing hope even when everything seemed lost. Finally, they met in the central hall. Marin had cleared the path as much as possible. The Queen took her place beside him, her armor shining in the faint red light. The Dravik had realized that a single human and the Queen were holding the line. They advanced cautiously, not knowing which side to attack first. Marin raised his blade and moved to intercept the first attacker. The Queen followed his instructions, her weapon raised and her shield ready. The first clash was intense. Sparks flew as metal struck metal. The Queen blocked a powerful strike, then swung her weapon with guidance from Marin. The attacker fell. Another came from the side. Marin dodged and struck, guiding the Queen's next move. Together they created a rhythm, a partnership born from necessity. The enemy could not predict them because they were not acting alone. They were a unit, human and Queen, courage and strategy combined. Hours passed. Each wave of Dravik was met with resistance. Marin's body ached, his armor was damaged further, yet he continued. The Queen's armor was scratched, her arms tired, but her will did not falter. They had become a wall that the enemy could not easily pass. Then, a loud rumble shook the palace. Outside, the Dravik ships moved closer, preparing for a larger strike. Marin realized the final confrontation was near. He turned to the Queen. "We will need one last strategy. They will attack in full force." The Queen nodded. "Then we fight together. No more waiting." Marin guided her to a small control panel on the wall. It was old, built by the first rulers of Nareth. He tapped into the manual energy grid, rerouting the remaining power to the central doors and barriers. The lights glowed golden, almost like the palace remembered its former glory. "Stand back a moment," Marin instructed. He activated the grid. Energy surged through the doors, filling the corridor with blinding light. Sparks danced across the walls. The Dravik paused, surprised by the sudden display of power. Marin grinned slightly under his helmet. "Now, Your Majesty. Follow me." They moved forward together. The Queen kept close, her movements guided by Marin's instructions. The Dravik attacked with all their remaining force, but the combined human and Tryon defense held strong. Blasts of energy collided with barriers, weapons clashed, and sparks flew through the hall. The Queen struck with precision, Marin countered every attack, and together they pushed the enemies back. The corridors became a gauntlet that the Dravik could not pass. Each step they took was met with resistance. Each strike they aimed was blocked or countered. Finally, after a long and exhausting battle, the corridor was clear. The remaining Dravik fell back. Their reinforcements had been destroyed or forced to retreat. The palace was still damaged, smoke and fire lingering, but the Queen and Marin had held the line. The Queen looked at the human beside her. His armor was battered, his weapon glowing faintly, but he was still standing. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You have done more than anyone could have imagined. You have kept the light alive." Marin shook his head. "I only did what was necessary, Your Majesty. You are the light of these worlds." I only stood beside it, her eyes glistened. "Your kind has taught me something I almost forgot. Courage is not in strength alone, but in the heart. You have the heart of a hero, human." Marin nodded quietly. The palace was still burning in places, the battle was not entirely over, but for now, the Queen was safe. They had survived the night of shadows together. Outside, the twin moons hung low. The stars above the palace shone bright, reflecting in the broken crystals of the walls. In that light, the Queen and her human guard stood side by side, a living reminder that courage could shine brighter than any star. The human barrier had held, and the Queen's light had not been extinguished. Morning came to the palace of Nareth slowly. The fires from the night of battle still glowed faintly in the broken halls. Smoke rose from shattered corridors and melted crystal walls. The palace that had once shone like a constellation was now a mix of golden reflections and dark shadows. Rescue teams from the Tryon fleet arrived, their ships descending silently from orbit. They had received faint signals from the palace's emergency beacon, and what they found astonished them. The queen was alive, sitting before the throne in her polished armor. Her eyes were steady, though fatigue weighed on her shoulders. Beside her stood the human who had defended her through the night. Marin was battered and exhausted. His armor was scratched and dented, his weapon glowing faintly but still functional. Dust and smoke covered his uniform, and his hair stuck to his forehead from sweat. Yet he stood as he had all night, alert and ready. The Tryon soldiers stepped carefully into the hall. They had feared the worst, imagining the queen would be captured or worse. But here she was, alive, and so was the human who had been assigned to protect her. Many looked at Marn with surprise, unable to believe that a single human had held the palace against the Dravic forces. The queen rose and walked toward the center of the hall. She raised her voice so all could hear. "These walls have been tested. Our enemies have come, and many of our guards have fallen. Yet we have survived, not by machines, not by numbers, but by the courage of one human. Guard Marin has stood where all others fled. He has held the palace when silence fell, and for that we owe him more than words can say." Marin lowered his weapon slightly and bowed his head in respect. He had never fought for recognition. He fought because it was his duty. Yet even he felt the weight of what had happened, the long hours and the choices that had saved the queen and the palace. The Tryon soldiers approached carefully, inspecting the corridors. They found destroyed Dravic weapons and motion mines that had slowed the invaders. They looked at Marin with admiration, realizing that he had not only defended the queen but also preserved the integrity of the palace. Queen Asera turned to the human. "Marin, your actions will be remembered in every hall, every city, and every world under my protection. You have shown what humans are capable of. You have reminded us that courage is not measured by strength alone, but by the heart that refuses to give up." Marin shook his head again, his voice calm. "I did only what I was trained to do, Your Majesty. The palace is your domain. I only kept it safe." The queen smiled gently. "No, you did more than that. You stood as a symbol of hope. You have reminded all of us that even when darkness falls, someone must keep the light alive." Outside, the Dravic ships had retreated. Their forces were defeated or scattered, unable to penetrate the human and Tryon defense. The twin suns rose slowly over the horizon, bathing the palace in soft golden light. The fires and smoke began to fade in the morning breeze, leaving the ruins of battle in sharp contrast to the shining walls that remained intact. In the following days, the palace was repaired. Crystal walls were replaced, corridors were cleared, and the damaged shields were restored. Yet amidst the restoration, the story of what had happened during the Night of Shadows spread across the worlds. Marin's courage became the centerpiece of every report, every tale, and every lesson told to future generations. Queen Asera ordered that a memorial be built in the central plaza of the palace. It was simple but powerful. A statue of a human soldier, standing tall beside the queen's throne with eyes forward and weapon ready. Beneath it were engraved words in both Tryon and human script. When the palace fell silent, humanity kept its promise. Citizens from all worlds visited the memorial. Children of different species would come and hear the story of a human who had defended the queen when all others had fallen. They learned that bravery was not about size or speed or strength alone. It was about determination, patience, and the choice to act when it mattered most. Marin was given a place in the palace. He was offered rank, honors, and privileges. Yet he remained humble. He preferred quiet walks along the restored corridors, checking the security of the palace not for recognition, but because he understood that vigilance was a duty, not a reward. Queen Asera often met him privately. She asked for his advice on security measures and emergency planning. She trusted his judgment completely. Over time, she realized that humans brought a perspective that was different from any Tryon soldier. They saw danger clearly, acted decisively, and never wavered when it mattered. Marin became an example, not just as a guard, but as a symbol of human potential. Years passed, and the story of the night the palace fell silent became legend. Tryon historians wrote of the human who stood alone, defending the queen. Songs were composed not of battle, but of courage and resolve. Marin's actions were used to teach young soldiers and civilians alike that the measure of a person was in their choices when faced with overwhelming odds. Even as the palace returned to normal life, the memory of that night remained vivid. The halls where Marin had fought were left slightly scarred as a reminder. The queen insisted on keeping one section of the main corridor slightly burned, A lesson for all future generations that courage leaves a mark, not always perfect but unforgettable. Marin himself never sought fame. He continued to serve the palace quietly, training young guards, teaching them strategy, and sharing lessons learned from the Night of Shadows. His presence reminded everyone that even a single human, when standing with purpose, could make a difference that echoed across worlds. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the palace again, Marin stood beside the queen on the balcony overlooking the city. The streets below were alive with peace, commerce, and celebration. The palace shone again in the moonlight, its crystal towers reflecting the silver glow. Queen Asera placed a hand on Marin's shoulder. "You have changed the way we see humans, Marin. You have shown us what courage truly means." Marin smiled faintly. "I only stood where I was needed, Your Majesty. It is your light that guides me." She looked out at the horizon, thinking of all the worlds under her protection. "No, it is your courage that kept the light burning. Your actions saved more than me. They saved every world that relies on this palace for hope." Marin nodded quietly. He understood that history would remember him, but he never thought of it while fighting. His thoughts were always on duty, on the queen, and on the choices that defined him in that moment. The memorial in the central plaza remained a focal point for visitors. They would place flowers, small trinkets, and symbols of respect at the base of the statue. Humans from other worlds traveled to Nerith to see the monument, hearing the story of one human soldier who had protected a queen and, in doing so, inspired generations. The queen continued to rule with wisdom, always keeping Marin near for advice. He became not only her guard but also her trusted companion in strategy. Together they ensured that the palace and its people remained safe, a symbol of unity between humans and Tryon. In time, Marin grew older, but the story of the night he stood guard never faded. Children would ask him questions, and he would smile gently, telling them about bravery, vigilance, and the importance of standing for what is right. He taught them that heroism is not in glory or titles, but in choices made when it matters most. The twin moons rose and fell over the palace of Nerith, as they had for centuries. The stars above still shone bright, reflecting off crystal towers and calm waters of the palace gardens. And there, in the quiet halls and bustling streets, the legacy of one human lived on. The memorial remained a testament to courage, a reminder to all that even when the palace fell silent, someone would stand, someone would fight, and humanity would keep its promise. Marin had fulfilled his duty. The queen was safe, the Tryon people had hope, and across 20 worlds, the story of the human who stood guard would inspire countless others for generations to come. The palace of glass and stars had survived. Its halls were filled again with music, laughter, and life. Yet in every corner, in every corridor, the echo of courage remained. The human who stood guard had proven that one person could change the fate of many, and that courage and loyalty would always leave a mark brighter than the stars. And so, the palace stood tall, the queen ruled with wisdom, and the legacy of the human guard lived on forever.